Just unmute your mics. Unmute your mics.
Okay.
Chris, unmute your mic, okay? Welcome to George Floyd Live Talk. Today we have very special guests with us. We have Christopher Skeete, who is member of St. Rose for Coalition Avenir du Québec. He's a parliamentary assistant to the Premier of Quebec for relations with English-speaking Quebecers. Welcome to the show, Mr. Skeete.
Hi, Allah. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate being here, Malik.
Of course, of course. And also we have Nazrin Gilyeva. She's a blogger, activist. She's from Azerbaijan roots, and she's presently residing in Houston, Texas. How you doing today?
Hey, Malik. Hi. Thank you for having me here. I'm doing great. Thank you.
Good, good. So what we're going to do, Nazrin, we're going to put you in the VIP room, and we're going to start off the show with Mr. Skeete, okay?
Sounds great.
Okay.
Bye, Nazrin.
So how you doing today, Mr. Skeete?
I'm doing well, man. It's a little late for me. I usually get an early start, but I'm happy to be here, Malik.
Okay, good, good, good. So tell us a little about who Christopher Skeete is and how you got involved in politics.
I got involved in politics when I discovered my first poli-sci class at Vanier.
Okay.
I fell in love with political science and started asking a question. I said to myself, well, why? And every why to a world event led to more answers and more questions. And at the end, I discovered a passion.
Okay, cool. And how'd you join Coalition Avenir Québec, the CAQ?
I was always looking for an alternative to the narrative that always existed in Quebec between the yes and the no, and the ADQ at the time had produced what's called as the Allaire report. And the Allaire report talked about a future in Quebec that didn't depend on yes or no. It was giving Quebec its rightful place within Canada. So I joined the ADQ early on outside of school. And then there's this guy going around wanting to change the discourse in Quebec. His name was François Legault in 2011. I became a member right away.
Okay, cool, cool. And let's talk about your role. So you're a member for St. Rose for the Coalition Avenir de Québec. You're also a parliamentary assistant to the Premier of Quebec for relations with the English-speaking Quebecers. So explain to us exactly what your role is, please.
Yeah, so basically in poli-sci, we have three levels of government. The first level is the executive. That's the premier and all the ministers. They form the executive. I'm from the legislative branch, and at the legislative branch, you have parliamentary assistants whose job it is to assist the ministers in the role and in the work that they do. As parliamentary assistant to the premier, my job is to support the premier's objectives. He's the minister in charge of the English Secretariat, and I support him by taking care of the nuts and bolts for him while he's busy governing Quebec during this pandemic and other things. So that's my role, is to make sure the Secretariat is responding to the mission that it has to support English vitality in Quebec. Okay,
so for those who are just tuning in, we are presently with Christopher Skeete, who is the member of St. Rose for Coalition Avenir de Québec, and he's also the parliamentary assistant to the Premier of Quebec for relations with English-speaking Quebecers. If you have any questions, feel free to give us your questions in the chat. My next question for you is, talk to us about what the CAQ stands for, because I know they say they're a national party. Explain to us what a national party is based on the CAQ.
Well, the simplest way to say what a nationalist party is you have in Quebec the Federalists, historically, and we have the sovereignists on the other hand. A nationalist party is basically, the easiest way to put it is, it's a Quebec first approach, which says we're happy to be in Canada, but at the same time, we're really proud to be Quebecers. And when it comes to the way that we want to be in Canada, it's a Quebec first point of view, and especially in terms of respecting our jurisdictions. When you talk about jurisdictions like healthcare and education, it's very important for Quebecers to have, the constitutional protections and jurisdictions that we have in those competencies. We want to hold on to them dearly. So it's basically a midway point between being a separatist and being a federalist.
Okay. And let's talk about your role as the with relations with the English speaking community, and what exactly do you do for the English community?
Yeah, that's a very good question. In 2017, just before the last provincial election,
Mm-hmm.
the former Liberal government created what's called the Secretariat for English Relations.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, what it means is, recognizing that the English community has particular issues that it faces in terms of community vitality, in terms of lack of access, really, to the Quebec state. This
Okay.
secretariat helps the English people, helps the English population in Montreal and outside of Montreal get access to a government that they should have access to. And I think that's an important thing, Malik. Over the past 50 years, the separatist, mantra has sort of removed the English community from the day-to-day of Quebec. The Secretariat is there to give that Quebec back to the English population.
Okay. Now let's talk about, I know that there's supposed to be something coming out on racism that the your party is supposed to be launching. When is this coming out? What can people expect from this?
Well, I think we have to take a step back, right? During
Mm-hmm.
the summer, the premier announced the creation of a committee,
That's what I'm talking about, the committee.
Le Groupe
Okay.
d'Action contre le Racisme. But
Okay.
before that, a lot of people say, well, why not do another, a parliamentary commission, with all the parties and everybody and a full-fledged commission. The problem with
Mm-hmm.
a commission, Malik, is that commissions take time
Yeah.
and they're very expensive.
Okay.
And, you hear a lot of witnesses and you get a. But the problem is, we've already done that work in Quebec. We already know what the problem is in a lot of ways. So what my committee
Mm-hmm.
has been doing is
Mm-hmm.
it's a TAC-only committee. There's 3 ministers that sit on there, and there's 7 total members. And we're
Okay.
basically sharpening our pencils. We're looking at everything that's been done over the past few years, all the
Mm-hmm.
reports that we know exist. We're compiling them and seeing what's the fastest and best way to move the needle in the short term. And I think that's what we're hoping to do. And the report is due before the end of the year.
Okay. We have a question from Grayan Checklin. His question is, would a CAC flip back to being a separatist if they think it's winnable? It's a question from
Yeah,
Graham.
that's a very good question, because the premier, I'm sure your listeners know, is a former PQ minister.
Mm-hmm.
He was Minister of Health and Minister of Education for the PQ. I'm not a separatist. I would never be part of a separatist party. That is not at all within our plans to do anything like that. So that's a hard no.
Okay. All right. We have a question from Stuart Aston. Why will the premier not use the words systemic racism? And that's a big question on people's mind. Why wouldn't he use those words, systemic racism?
That is a very big question, and I think words matter.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at the Quebec lay of the land, and we saw it a lot, with this issue that happened at the University of Ottawa this week, right? There's this Canadian consensus, there's a Quebec consensus. Sometimes it's not always the same. What we do know about the issue in Quebec is that there is racism. No one's denying that there is racism in Quebec, but the word systemic is not unifying. Not everybody agrees with exactly what that means, and there's some people believe that
whose they don't agree.
Well, a lot of people in the population don't agree with what that term means. But again, what's important to take away from this is that word doesn't have a consensus, but there is a consensus that there's racism and that we need to do something about it. And so basically, what I would say is that systemic racism is a title of a book, whereas we're writing the book to eliminate racism. So we can argue about what we should call the book. But I want to spend a lot of time arguing about the cover of the book. I want to talk about what's inside the book. And what's inside the book is eradicating racial profiling, making sure that our native populations feel at home in their home, making sure that we address issues. For instance, Blacks and persons of color have less access to the Quebec civil service. Why is that? So really trying to move the needle in actual concrete ways, more so than worrying about what we're going to call the thing.
So I know recently there was a report that was given to Valérie Laplante regarding systemic racism, admitting that it was systemic racism. So what is that report? What value does that report have to the CAC? Does that mean anything to the CAC, that report that admits that there's systemic racism?
Yeah, so they came to the conclusion on their end that there is. Other groups have said that there isn't. What we're saying is, our takeaway from that police report is, racial profiling is an issue. And what we realize is historically, they haven't been quantifying the way that they collect data when they do those random interceptions. Now, having been myself a victim of racial profiling by the police, especially in Montreal. I have to say, I really don't care what you call it. I want it to stop. So what we're saying, and my takeaway from those measures is that now they're going to be quantifying the interpellations. They want to have documented instances. They want to quantify the phenomenon, and I think that's really important. And I think that's what moves the needle. So again, we can discuss what we're going to call it, but I like the fact that they're moving in the right direction in terms of racial profiling. And we're going to have some issues as well. We're working on a green book here at the provincial level that's going to be talking about policing in general throughout Quebec. So there's a lot of good work being done, and I'm optimistic that beyond this always bringing it back to the words, concrete measures are being taken in Quebec, and I'm about to be a part of it.
Okay, so you do agree that there is racial profiling, and there is a problem with that.
I've been a victim of driving while black. My assistant Anaina, and from my office, a couple times this year has been pulled over. It's absurd, and it needs to stop.
Okay, I want to let people know who just tuning in. We are presently with Mr. Christopher Skeete, who is a member for St. Rose for Coalition Avenir du Québec. He's also the parliamentary assistant to the Premier of Quebec for relations with the English-speaking population here in Quebec. Now, you mentioned the controversy in the University of Ottawa, and that Canada has their way of thinking of it, and Quebec has a way of thinking of it. So do you agree that teachers should be able to use the N-word in classes or not?
Well, to be clear, what I said was that there appears to be a consensus in English Canada, and there's a different consensus that appears to be in Quebec. Now, obviously, individuals are going to have different points of view. I don't know that our society, Malik, is richer if we ban the book, Huckleberry Finn or Uncle Tom's Cabin, or if we stop teaching To Kill a Mockingbird, just because the words in there are uncomfortable. I think the lessons of the book are a lot more profound and a lot more valuable than arguing about a particular word that may or may cause offense. But I think, when we're looking at the way that people respond to hurtful words, I think it needs to be put into context of whether or not the intention was hurtful. I mean, if I'm being pulled over, or if I'm walking into a store and I'm being followed around and then someone uses the N-word, for me, that's a very different connotation than a person who is a white person who's trying to teach me about To Kill a Mockingbird. Well, then of course I'm not feeling the same kind of hate when the person is speaking to me in that regard. So I think context is important.
So the context of teachers using the N-word. So do you agree that teachers that are black or non-black or whatever are allowed to use the N-word when teaching?
Yeah. Like I said, context is everything. If I'm getting a grade and I say, hey, what's up with this grade? And she says, you're a dumb N, and that's why you're getting that grade. That's a very different thing from saying, hey, you know what? We're talking about Uncle Tom's Cabin, and we're talking about the way it was back in the day. That's a very different context. So I think it's okay. But to more to your point, though, one of the things that we're looking at, Malik, in my racism committee with the three ministers, is that what we want to do is introduce.
Who are the ministers? Who are the ministers? Mention the ministers that are on this committee.
Minister Lionel Carman, who's he's co-presiding it with Nadine Giraud. And of course, we also have Yann Lafrenière, who's the minister responsible for Native Affairs, who sits on that committee, and a couple other M&A's colleagues of mine that sit on that committee. So one of the things that we're looking at in that committee, Malik, is to say, how do we teach Black history, or how does a person who's not Black, how can they talk about Black issues without feeling like a hypocrite? How does a person say, I want to teach my kids about the proud, Native history, but how do I do it if I'm not myself Native? So one of the things we've been looking at, and this is an idea that a Black student in the West Island gave me, was that we need to teach teachers how to teach diversity. They're so uncomfortable talking about it that either they don't cover it or they cover it incorrectly. So it would be a wise thing to introduce in the curriculum for teachers how to teach diversity and giving them the tools to address these questions without causing offense. Okay.
We have a couple of people in the comments are asking, did he say it's okay to use the N-word? Did he just say it's okay? That's Tanisha Gittins. There's Jason Shamba Bergs. So you want to address that?
Well, I mean, I could say it again. I think it's okay, but I think it's contextual. I think intention is very important. I don't want to be denied an education or a full understanding of an issue just because we're afraid to say a word. I think universities are places to grow and learn and to challenge and to push limits. And I think the second that you take away that aspect of university, that aspect of deep understanding and that challenging, the challenging the status quo, I think once you do that, you've lost a sense of what university should be about. So context is everything.
Well, I'm going to disagree with you on that one.
Okay.
As a black man growing up in Little Burgundy, we were taught never to use that word. And I'll give you an example. Once you open that can of worms of letting teachers use that word, we see the example of that teacher in Montreal North who's using the word very freely, even though he's talking about a book, the way he's using it, because when other people hear it, it opens up a can of worms. Another example is Patrick Lagacé from 98.5, who's using the N-word in French freely on French radio during prime time. You understand? So for me, and this is something that, as a school commissioner, I'm against the N-word, whether it's a basketball team, football team playing music with the N-word, whether it's talking in the hallways, whether it's a teacher reading a book. For me, that word is a no-no, and it needs to be banned because a lot of people don't truly understand the hurtful, the hatred, and the negativity that goes with that word. And once you start letting anyone use that word, it's just gonna propel and be misused and exploited. I mean, that's my definite thoughts on it.
And Malik, I think your point is easy to defend. I think what you have, a lot of people share your opinion. I think Oprah has your opinion, and Jay-Z and her had a big debate on her show about how that word now belongs to us.
I argued with Jay-Z.
For ours to use, So
I told Jay-Z and 50 Cent that they shouldn't be using the word. We had a disagreement. I told them straight.
Yeah, well, what I'm saying is it's far from certain who's right? Does the word belong to us now and then we can only use it and we remove the hateful connotation from it? Or is it just a hateful word that should never be used? I don't pretend to have the truth there, Malik. Both sides are very intelligent.
Right. Well, you're a Trinidadian, right?
My father's from Trinidad, yeah. My mom was French-Canadian. Okay. My dad was born in Trini.
I know he's not letting you use that in that household.
To be honest, I don't think I ever said it in front of him, but
you'll be getting licks.
I probably would have got the belt. Yeah, probably.
Yeah, you would have definitely got the belt. So just let people know that we are presenting with Mr. Skeete, who is a member of St. Holes for Coalition La CAQ. And let people also know that later on in the show, we have Nezrin, who is a blogger activist from Houston, Texas, who will be talking about the Armenian and Azerbaijan conflict. So stay tuned later on. We will be talking and discussing about the Armenian and Azerbaijan conflict, but we're going to have the Azerbaijan point of view. So now this committee that's coming out, are you able to say exactly when but when you guys will be fully launching this campaign? Is there a date in mind for it?
We're aiming for the fall. I mean, we don't have a hard date, but it's definitely going to be sooner rather than later. I think voters need action. I think, especially after Joyce Echequan, we definitely need to do some concrete measures. Like I said before, had we done a parliamentary commission, we'd be talking about this for the next 2 years. I'm happy that we chose to do this the fast way. We're going to move the needle. What's one thing we say to ourselves every day in this committee? It's important to move the needle on racism in Quebec. Now, we're not going to solve every problem in the world in one shot, but we're definitely going to take a positive step, and it's going to be concrete measures, things that matter.
Okay. Now, let's talk about Indigenous Affairs. Now, we saw recently the stuff that happened with Joyce, and I know it goes on every day. What are your thoughts on that, and how is Quebec going to tackle this issue with Indigenous people?
So one of the things that we agreed to do in that committee, and just as I said before, Yan Lafrenière, Minister for Native Affairs, and also his parliamentary secretary sit on that committee. We're going to come up with 2 separate reports, or at least different sections that address Native affairs distinctly from persons of color, because I think the Native experience is different in Quebec and in Canada, and I think we have to recognize that. I did tell you that I think it'd be a good idea for you to have Yan Lafrenière on your show. I think you dedicate a whole show to these types of issues, and I know that Yan Lafrenière would probably enjoy coming on your show. But basically, the idea is to examine the situation that occurs in Native populations distinctly. I know that when I went to Val-d'Or recently for a commission for juvenile sexual exploitation, we met with Native communities that had real issues about sexual exploitation or had access to education and how to manage their own child protective services. So these are these are things that we need to look at and in order to really address some of the issues. You know, are our services in Quebec that we have for everybody, are they adapted to their reality? Isn't there a way that we can give them something that represents a little bit more of their reality? We have to think outside the box to solve these problems that have been going on since the Federation.
Yeah. So what's your goal as a politician? What are you looking forward to in 2020 and 2021?
That's you know, I don't get that question enough because I think it's a fundamental question. For me, it was always about getting us out of the funk of always having to choose between whether or not you're a separatist or whether or not you're not. And if you weren't a separatist, well, you sort of had to be on this one side of the issue. You had to be a part of one party, and whether you liked it or not, and you were all in. And I'm just happy, and I'm very proud that in 2018 we broke that. We broke that, and we showed that, you know, it's not just you know, a one option thing. And I think that's important because I think for the past 50 years, English speaking Quebecers, you know, when you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, their number one issue was, I got to save the country. So while you're thinking like that, you're not thinking about protecting, you know, you're not thinking about you know, public transportation. You're not thinking about who's thinking about what on education or who has plans for healthcare. While you're saving the country, you're not thinking of those things. And I think 50 years of disenfranchisement creates impacts in the community. Now we're outside of that, and we could talk about other things.
Okay, cool. What do you feel that the biggest misconception of the CAC is? What's the biggest misconception?
Wow, there's a lot. That depends what perspective you have. But there is I think that one of your listeners before had a question about sovereignty. I think that was, especially at the beginning, a major question that I used to get a lot. Oh, well, you know, he's just a closet separatist. He's just waiting for the right moment, as though we're gonna somehow like, you know, we're gonna do a referendum right under your nose. You never saw it coming. I get that a lot less now. We also get the classic, which is, oh, well, the CAC is racist. And I think that's a funny one, considering that there are now 5 Black people at the National Assembly, 3 of which are on our side of the fence, 2 of which are ministers, 1 of which reports to the Prime Minister. So I think that's a funny assertion. So things like that, I think, are common misconceptions.
Okay, I just want to go back and read a couple of comments that we have here. We have Janice Smallwright. She says, "Thank you, Malik. The N-word should be banned. It is hateful." Tanisha Gittins, "This definitely should not be used by a white teacher in a classroom. That much I know. I feel it shouldn't be used by any teacher in a classroom. Still doesn't give the right to a white man teacher to use it in any context. I say no one should be using it." Graham Checklin says, "No one should say it. It's horrible to hear kids perpetrating that garbage." And Tanisha says again, "You need to break the idea that using the N-word is okay." Yeah, break that, sir. I agree. I'm breaking that right now. Letting people know that the N-word is not to be used. And even when I go on school tours, I don't even use the N-word. I just say the N-word. I can't even say that word. But
I have to say that I also don't make a habit of saying it. I think there's a difference though, and I think we can disagree about, you know, whether or not Black people should say it against themselves. That's one thing, but I think education is a place for truth telling, and I think you don't want to deny history by coding over it or glossing over it. The reality was, you know, before 1865 in the U.S. and before 1835 in Canada, we were just a bunch of N's walking around, and we were less than. And I think you got to call it that in order to understand that. If you want to address racism that confronts Native populations, we have to look back at history and say, you know what? You know, one of the reasons why we treat them like less than nothing in contemporary societies, because historically they were seen as less than and called all kinds of names meant to diminish them. I don't want to gloss over that. I think that call a spade. And once you accept the harshness of the word, I think then you're able to fully assimilate it and move on. But I mean, intelligent people can disagree, Malik.
Okay. We have a question from Don Smooth Garrett. He says, wouldn't the indigenous community be better to serve with a member of their own community as opposed to a former police officer?
That's a very good question. The reality is, no, out of the 125 members of parliament representing 4 different parties, which is historical in a bipartisan system like ours, no native won. I mean, of course, it would have been a relevant consideration, but at the same time, should we, just because the person is native, does that mean they should be the native minister? I'm not sure I want to live in a world where just because you're one thing, you're sort of pigeonholed into that responsibility. But at the same token, we didn't have a choice. There were no other persons. You should know, though, that the person who represents the parliamentary secretary for the Native Affairs, he's also a former police officer, but he's a former police officer that lived in Shibugamu, who has over 30 years of policing native populations and won in the riding of Ungava, where he goes around getting his election signatures in the skidoo. And I think over 50% of the population is native. So I think, that tells you something, that they trusted this man to be their representative.
Okay. So we talked about the misconceptions. What do you feel are the biggest accomplishments that your party, the Coalition Avenir Quebec, has done for the population?
Well, let me tell you what we've done for the English population. I said before, that we're sort of pigeonholed as being these anti this, anti that. But the reality is, my party is responsible for a lot of money being given to the English population. For instance, in the last budget, we allocated an increase of 40% for the English population, $6.1 million over 5 years of new money that's going to go directly to support community groups in Montreal and in the regions of Quebec. 4.7 million is going to be going to create wellness centers. We know that the elderly are increasingly isolated, and the older you are, the more you revert to your primary language, and the more isolated you feel if you're not with people who speak like you. I'm going to be creating over 20 wellness centers throughout Quebec with that money. We also noticed that the English population has a 3%, this is before the pandemic, but a 3% unemployment rate higher than the Francophone. So if the Francophones were at 9, the English was at 12. Now that's ridiculous. So I allocated $7 million over 5 years to create a round table to get English community groups in employability at the table to find out what's keeping English people behind. And of course, I added over 20% of new staff. We added $1 million to hire new staff at the Secretariat. So and this is for the people who are supposed to be, anti, fill in the blank, right? So there's real progress being made. I'm very proud of it.
Okay, so we have people from the community that are watching the show right now. How can they get funding? How does that work?
One of the issues that I did a consultation tour last year over 3 months. We visited different regions of Quebec, and we found out that the English population is so disconnected from the province. They're used to not being a part of Quebec, right? Remember that sovereignty debate I told you about? We're so used to just having to pick Canada that we have this instinct of always going to Ottawa to get funding. And we don't even think about applying to the provincial government to get funds. So what I've been doing with the Secretary is sort of helping these community groups get a lay of the land. What does the Quebec government look like? How does it think? What are its priorities, so that people can orient their offer or service to the priorities of the government? And so we basically, one at a time. We bring them, we introduce them to the sous-ministres in this department and that department, and when the links are made, it's easier to understand. And that's rebuilding 50 years of disenfranchisement that was caused by the sovereignist movement that kept us away from our own home. Malik, think about it. Healthcare is one of the closest things to your reality. People had no concept of what the province was doing for them. Education is a pillar in our community, and it's also a pillar in our future. That's 100% of provincial jurisdiction, and once again, we're completely separate from that. Transportation, cars, you interact more often with the provincial government than you do probably your spouse, and yet you're completely disconnected and disenfranchised from this order of government. We had to change that, and we're giving a lot of money to a lot of community groups to reintroduce them to the Quebec state.
Another thing I wanted to touch on was the English school board situation. So I know that the government of Quebec has gone back and forth with the English school boards to try to dismantle the school boards to create school centers. Tell us why you guys changed the French school boards to school centers, and why you guys want to change the English school boards to school centers.
Basically, the reason why we want to abolish school boards altogether, be they English or French, was to depoliticize education. Now, for me, I don't think that we need to have politics in our schools to make them run well. I think what we need is passionate teachers, and the people who are closest to the student, people who know the student's name, are the ones who make the real difference to that student. So our vision was always that we needed to remove politics from the equation, and that's what we did in the Francophone side. What we did was we gave parents and teachers the power.
Okay, so when you say remove politics, explain to me what you mean by remove politics.
Well, let's talk about an issue that happened last year with regards to school closures. There were some school closures in the West Island. There were some school closures in the East. A lot of people said, well, the Battle Cat closed an English school because they hate the English population. But the reality is that for many years, those schools were half empty. And
it's true.
The politics of this thing was that no school board commissioner, no school board president wanted to make the decision of closing those schools because they knew it wasn't political win. They knew that if they closed it or if they sold it to the Francophones, who, by the way, were overflowing, they knew that they would have political problems. It would hurt their prospects of getting elected at the provincial level. It would hurt their prospects one day of getting elected at the federal level. And it would hurt their prospects of being reelected as a commissioner. So for political considerations, not what's good for the community, not what's good for the kids, not what's good for the money of the school system, those decisions weren't being made. And what they did is they punted. They punted the decision to the Ministry of Education, who inherited a crisis. We inherited a crisis where in the East End, we were denying Francophones going to school because there was just not enough place. We cannibalized cafeterias, we cannibalized music rooms, we cannibalized broom closets, and then at one point we just had to, we had to take the school.
Yeah, I think that there was a situation where those schools should have been worked out a plan earlier to give it to the Francophones, because at the end of the day, I work in those communities. I know that the French schools are overflowing, but I still think that the role of a commissioner is very important in school boards. And, being a newly elected commissioner, I see the work. Oh, I don't know where he went. Okay, I guess this thing came out. Anyways, I'll just continue saying that, the importance of a role of a commissioner is very important in school boards, to make democratic decisions on that. So unfortunately, Mr. Keith is no longer with us, but I want to thank him for coming on the show. And I also want to let you guys know that next week we'll be doing a full show on the N-word. Next week we're going to be doing a full show on the N-word. But right now we have a special guest with us. Right now, her name is Nazrin, and she is a blogger, activist from Houston, Texas. And she's an Azeri. She's from Azerbaijan. How are you today, Nazarin?
I'm doing great, Malik. How about you?
I'm good. I see you right now. You got your flag in the background there?
Yep.
Nice. So talk to us a little about who is the Azerbaijan people. Tell us about them.
Okay. For those who don't know where that country is, if you know where is Russia, Iran, and Georgia, Azerbaijan is small oil and gas country just in between. So who are Azerbaijanis? We are peaceful nation, loving nation, very friendly nation, living near the Caucasian.
Okay. And so talk to us about this conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan that's been going on since 1988 and it's recently exploded again. So what's the situation with that?
Let me take you through the brief story of the history of Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. So friendship between two nations, which had lasted for decades, in an instant was destroyed by Armenians' separatist ideology and government. Nagorno-Karabakh is Azerbaijani land, has been under the illegal occupation by Armenia for 28 years. So nearly 1 million of Azerbaijani refugees have been expelled of the home, so that 150,000 Armenians can illegally occupy it for themselves. Nagorno-Karabakh is not a disputed territory. It's an internationally recognized territory of Azerbaijan, which has been illegally occupied by Armenia for almost 30 years. So Armenia didn't stop at Nagorno-Karabakh and continued the ethnic cleansing. As a result, 7 adjacent regions, which Armenia had never claimed before, were occupied. So having expelled nearly 1 million people, Armenia called these 7 regions, adjacent regions, a buffer zone. So for almost 30 years, Armenia has ignored a series of international documents and resolutions, including 4 UN Security Council resolutions demanding Armenians' immediate withdrawal out of the Azerbaijani territories. So this is the brief history.
So why is it that Armenia claims that area belongs to them? Because I know there's been it's a very confusing I guess history between you two, right?
That's true, but history is history, and for now we're living in the 21st century where all countries have their internationally recognized borders, right? So the whole world, the UN Council, recognized that territory as the part of Azerbaijan. So whatever the Armenians are claiming, they are not recognizing the international borders of one country. So, they're like breaking the international law.
So why, after 26 years, did this war suddenly erupt again and so violently? Why after 26 years?
It's about 28 years.
28
that's a really great question. I think the couple factors played a role over here. So the new prime minister, Mr. Pashinyan, he claimed that Nagorno-Karabakh.
So the new prime minister of which country?
Armenia.
Okay, Armenia. Okay.
So he claimed that Nagorno-Karabakh is Armenia. So there are a lot of interviews with him. He's claiming that that's Armenian territories, which shows that they were moving away from the peaceful negotiations, which have been like taking 30 years for now. There were a couple provocations from Armenian side. It's back in April 2016, in July 2020, and recently it was the September 2020, where they were trying to occupy new territories. And after the recent Beirut explosions, probably you have heard about it, there are like around 100 Lebanese Armenians.
How many Lebanese? How many Lebanese?
They were trying to resettle around 100 Lebanese to the 7 adjacent regions of Azerbaijani territories, which are occupied. So all this was just provocations from Armenian side, and that's why the war started right now.
Okay. So what does it take to have peace in that region? What do you feel it takes?
The solution is really.
What's the solution?
Yeah, the solution is pretty clear and straightforward. The occupied territories should be liberated. The occupants should immediately leave the territories, and then we can start the peaceful negotiations about the Nagorno-Karabakh or about the people of Armenia who are welcome to live in Azerbaijan. And even now, around 30,000 Armenians are living peacefully in Azerbaijan.
Now, when you say the territories, you're talking about the Nagorno-Karabakh territories, right?
Yes, and 7 adjacent regions. It's like next to the Nagorno-Karabakh.
Okay, so I'm going to put a map up right now, right? Yep. So that green part right here, that's the part you guys are fighting over, right?
Correct.
So in that part right there, there's 7 regions you're saying, or the regions are around there?
It's Nagorno-Karabakh and 7 regions around there.
That you guys are in conflict with right now?
Yes, but that's territories of Azerbaijan as clearly seen from the map.
Okay. Now the other thing, this little part here is Azerbaijan too, right? Right here.
Yes, that's the Nakhchivan, right.
Okay. So how did that become Azerbaijan? Just curious, because it looks like it's more closer, it's more next to Armenia.
True. That's back from the history. Actually, Armenians have been resettled in those territories. So Azerbaijan have been there, and Azerbaijan and Azerbaijani people have been living there for centuries. By the time they decided the Persian and Persian and Russian empires were fighting, they were decided to resettle Armenians over those territories. So that's how it happened.
Okay. Now let's go back to
Nagorno-Karabakh.
Yeah. So before this recent conflict it was mostly Armenians living in this area here?
In Nagorno-Karabakh, yes, but in
yeah.
seven adjacent regions, it was mostly populated by Azerbaijani people.
And in terms of which government was supporting Nagorno-Karabakh before the conflict?
It was always under Azerbaijani regulations.
Okay.
Yeah, Azerbaijan.
Okay, but I was told that the Armenians were the ones supporting them in terms of financial aid and so forth.
Is it right now, or are we talking about like 30 years ago?
No, I'm talking about like before this conflict here. So before the conflict that broke out in 2020.
Okay.
So
yes. Right now,
the last 28
years. I got your question. Yeah. So on the occupied territories, they have established the organization called Nagorno-Karabakh Republic, which then renamed to Artsakh Republic. This is an illegal organization which is not recognized by any country in the world, including Armenia itself.
Okay, so you're saying the Artsakh Republic is they're the ones that want to be recognized independently, but you're saying Azerbaijan doesn't recognize them. Is that what you're saying?
No, it's not me saying. It's the world recognized those territories as part of Azerbaijan. So it's not only me.
So what are the people? What's the sense of the people, the Azeri people, in terms of the war? How do they feel about the war? Because I know the last time, didn't you guys have like 26,000 people that perished in the war?
True. Like right now we have 1 million IDPs, refugees. In terms of Azerbaijani population, just to give you the sense of it, we have 10 million population, which means 1 out of 10 people is refugee. All of them haven't been
from where? Where are they coming from?
From Nagorno-Karabakh and 7 adjacent regions. So the region of the conflict. So they haven't been home for 30 years. The only thing they're dreaming about right now is to go back home. All they want is just to go back home. Whatever happens for 30 years, they were dreaming about it. And all they want is justice.
Okay. So we have a couple of questions here. So Debbie Edward wants to know, what would be the benefit to Azerbaijan if the Armenians were to suddenly leave and relocate? That's a question from Debbie Edward.
That's hard to answer right now. Well, what would be the benefits for Azerbaijani? Well, I don't see any benefits for Azerbaijani or Armenians here. If they want to leave, we're totally fine with that. Even now, there are 30,000 Armenians peacefully living in Azerbaijan. So we can continue living together. They can get the Azerbaijani citizens passports, whatever they need to get, and we can continue living peacefully as we used to live there before all this started.
Okay. Perry Boulaya says, what is required for a peaceful resolution?
For a peaceful resolution, all required is that Armenian troops withdraw their armed forces from occupied territories. So they need to leave our land. They need to go back and let our people go back home and live there.
So are there Armenian forces presently right now in Nagorno-Karabakh?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And what about the Azerbaijan forces? Are there Azerbaijan forces in Nagorno-Karabakh?
Presently, Azerbaijan conducts military operations in order to get back its occupied territories in Nagorno-Karabakh and 7 adjacent regions. And all we want to return the refugees home after almost 30 years. So in response, Armenia commits terrorist acts outside of the conflict zone. So the war is war. We understand it. It's going on the battle in the battlefield within the conflict zone. But what Armenia is doing right now, they're shelling the civilian cities, which are miles away from the conflict zone, killing innocent people. Like for now, Ganja have been shelled 3 times. It's, for you to understand, Ganja is the very dense populated city, second biggest city after in Azerbaijan, and it has been shelled 3 times. like around 50 plus civilians have been killed, and more than 100 have been wounded.
So Perry Boulard says, do you need help from the UN? So what's the UN's position on this whole thing?
Well, UN have been calling for the peaceful resolutions for almost 30 years, but unfortunately, Armenia was breaking that international law and denied to obey the resolutions. So whatever we want is just UN resolutions to happen. Like, we want Armenian troops to leave our lands.
Okay. I'm going to read you something that I read today. Eldar Aliyev, 26, a manager in one of Azerbaijan's biggest finance companies and a volunteer soldier, has spent barely 2 weeks at the front lines before returning home in a coffin. When you hear those kind of things, what does that make you feel?
That makes me feel really sad, but this is a war, and everyone understands that during the war there is going to be losses. But people for 30 years were living with the dream to get back home. Hundreds of stories where the soldiers have seen their houses shelled in those occupied territories after 30 years. I can show you hundreds of pictures of soldiers next to their destroyed houses in destroyed neighborhood, but just like realizing that this is their house just because of the tree which have been grown there for 30 years now. So this is really touching, and people wants to go back home. They just want the justice to happen.
Yeah, it's a very, very touchy and tough subject. But I wish peace for Armenia. I wish peace for Azerbaijan. I wish peace for the world, and I really hope you guys can work that out, because I remember as a little kid hearing about this situation, and it's tough for it to happen, still happen today. And just curious, are there a lot of Azeris in Canada and the US?
I know that there are quite a lot in the United States.
Okay.
I don't know the exact number, but yes, the Azerbaijani community over here is huge. I know the worldwide, it's just like 10 million living in Azerbaijani, and outside of Azerbaijan, it's around 40 million. So altogether, we're 50 million nation.
You said outside of Azerbaijan is 40 million?
Yes.
Wow. And where do most of the Azeris live? Outside of Azerbaijan, where are they living? The U.S. and where else?
25, 30 million. 25 in the range of 25, 30 millions are right now living in the country which is called Iran. The south part of Iran used to be the Azerbaijan. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, it's good. It's good. This shows all about.
And the rest are just across the countries.
Okay, this shows all about educating and people learning different things, and trying to find ways to find solutions, and more important, discuss social issues. So Nazarene, I want to thank you for coming on the show. Do you have anything that you want to say to the people here in Canada that are watching you right now? Anything you want to say to Canada?
Thank you so much, Malik, for introducing me here, for inviting me over here. I love Canada. I've been there once, and I just like Canada is insane. I love it. So just big hugs and kisses to all the people in Canada.
Okay, cool. I appreciate you coming on the show. And again, we wish peace for that territory, and hopefully you guys can find a way to work things out.
Thank you.
Okay, stay safe.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye. So that was Nazarene. She's a blogger, an activist from Azerbaijan. She lives in Texas, Houston right now. So, she was just on the show. I want to thank her for coming on the show. I also want to let you guys know that next week we will be having a discussion about SARS, what's going on in Nigeria. So I need you guys to tune in next week to hear about what's happening in Nigeria. We're also going to have a discussion about the N-word. And we're also going to invite the creators of the MTL Black Facebook group. They will be on next week right here. And I want to let you guys know also, I will be doing a free entrepreneurship program for kids this Saturday, 11 a.m. I need you guys to register. It's free. Give your kids a head start. That's what we're trying to do. Give your kids a head start. They can go to ustars.org to register right now. And it's going to be really a cool workshop where kids between the ages of 10 to 12 will be telling us what type of businesses that they want to put together. So we want to start them at an early age, and I'm going to help them create their businesses and give them the motivation to put together a business. And we'll be meeting over the next couple of weeks and months to build those businesses. So, you know, we're doing a free trial this Saturday. Go to ustars.org. You can use the email right there to learn more about this. And I think it's very important that at a young age, you know, we get our kids involved in entrepreneurship and these type of things. You know, far too often, you know, we lag behind other countries and other nations. So people, register your kids now. And you can also go to, for Black youth, we have Youth Leaders of Tomorrow, which is a program specifically for Black youth. So you can also check out that program, Youth Leaders of Tomorrow. So Black youth, if you know any high schoolers, elementary people, we have a workshop Saturday at 10 a.m. We have another workshop, a coding workshop Saturday at 10 a.m. 1 p.m. we have a mentorship workshop. And at 2 p.m. we have a motivational workshop with Isaiah Joyner. Rihanna Speed is doing the 1 o'clock workshop. So I need you guys to register right now. It's free. You know, Black parents, Black kids, let's stop talking. We need the action. This is your opportunity right here. Look, free program. Let's see how many register. Numbers on the screen, emails on the screen. I want to see you guys register. It's free. We're doing a coding class for kids, elementary school kids. We're doing a mentorship program at 1 o'clock on Saturday, and 2 o'clock we're doing a motivational talk with Isaiah Joyner, who is a very successful young man who's presently at Concordia University, and he's going to talk to you about his journey. I want to thank you guys for tuning in, and I want to see you guys next week, same time, 9 p.m. sharp. We'll see you guys next week. One love, peace, stay safe, and we'll see you next week at 9 p.m. Thank you.